We want to welcome Dawud Walid, who is the Executive Director of the Michigan chapter of the Council on American-Islamic Relations. He's joining us from Detroit. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Let me begin with some news on this Sunday morning, and it's front page of the Washington Post on an area that you're quite familiar with. In the first majority Muslim U.S. city, culture shock and fears of loss is the piece. A community that was predominantly Polish-American and now predominantly Muslim-American, including a majority city council in Hamtramck, Michigan, which is not too far from you. When you see this story and reaction, your thoughts?
Well, really here in our locality, it's really no big deal. The story of Hamtramck, Michigan is actually a very American story. This hamlet, as you stated, was a majority Polish-American at one time, and that's because Polish-Americans were not really welcome into the political process in the city of Detroit decades ago. They're Catholics, and due to anti-Catholic sentiment, anti-Polish sentiment, they settled into the area of Hamtramck and became basically politically dominant because they were the majority. Likewise, in metropolitan Detroit, Hamtramck has become a hamlet of Muslims, predominantly of Yemeni background, but also Bangladeshi, Bosnian, African American descent, and they've made this into a neighborhood. And when people move into a neighborhood, they seek to shape the local politics. So it's really not very surprising that Hamtramck has a majority Muslim city council coming January 2016, and probably in the, if not near future, the near distant future, will eventually have a Muslim mayor.
And Dearborn, Michigan, which is also just outside of Detroit, grew significantly in part because of the Ford Motor Company now being viewed as the Arab capital of North America. Explain the evolution of Dearborn.
Well, Dearborn, Michigan is the mostly concentrated area of Arabs in these United States of America. All of those Arab Americans are not Muslim. There are some that are Christian. But when we look back about a century ago, the reason why there are so many Arab Americans in metropolitan Detroit is really Henry Ford and the automobile industry. Just like how African Americans migrated to Michigan from the Jim Crow South looking for job opportunities, Arab Americans came to this area for the same reason, and that's in part because Henry Ford was the first industrialist to offer a non-white man the same hourly wage on the assembly line as a white man. And and we do know that Henry Ford had some issues regarding race. It wasn't like he was a Martin Luther King Jr. by any stretch of the imagination, but it was this policy that helped attract Arabs to the state of Michigan, working in the automobile industry. And the Rouge plant, which is in South Dearborn, it borders a majority Yemeni American community to this day, and this goes back, though, to decades and decades ago with Henry Ford.
And let's look at some demographic information with regard to Michigan, courtesy of the American Immigration Council, which includes the overall population of Michigan is just under 2% are Arab Americans. But as you said, in Dearborn, it has the nation's largest proportion of Arab Americans, accounting for about half of the population, just over 44,000 residents, and that's according to the 2013 census. But I also want to ask you about the political rhetoric with regard to Muslims in this country, and I want to share with you this story this morning from the New York Times. The headline focusing on Donald Trump saying he heard cheers on 9/11 and is urging the surveillance of some mosques. I want to share with you what he told supporters over the weekend. Hey, I watched when the World Trade Center came tumbling down, and I watched in Jersey City, New Jersey, where thousands and thousands of people were cheering as that was coming down. Thousands of people were cheering. Something's going on. We've got to find out what it is. Now, the New York Times points out it's not clear what Mr. Trump was referring to. There were cheers of support in some Middle Eastern countries that day, which were broadcast on television, but a persistent internet rumor of Muslims celebrating in Paterson, New Jersey was discounted by police officials at the time. A search of news accounts from that period show no reports of mass cheering in Jersey City. Your reaction?
Well, Donald Trump seems to be the political leader of false information and lies these days. I mean, keep in mind that he still is a person who champions, or at least he was very vocal in terms of the birther movement and questioning President Barack Obama's citizenship. So evokes false narratives to gain cheap political points is really nothing new for Donald Trump.
When he says that you're going to have watches over mosques in this country as a way to keep America safe, what do you think?
Well, I say that what he is putting forward is not only unconstitutional, but runs counter to the American values that we as a nation not only uphold for ourselves, but the values that we project to the rest of the world, that our country has the First Amendment. We believe in freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, but also freedom of religion. And there is no religious test for any group of people in these United States of America running for political office, but also likewise, there is no legal justification for any house of worship to be monitored simply because of their faith affiliation or denomination.
We're talking about Muslim Americans and Islamophobia. Our phone lines are open for Democrats 202-748-8000. For Republicans, 202-748-8001. We have a line for independents. You can also send us a tweet at C-SPAN WJ. This is the headline from Friday's Washington Post, harsh rhetoric towards Muslims. What is it like to be Arab American, to be a Muslim in America today, following the events in Paris a week and a half ago?
Well, just for clarification purposes, I'm an African American, but in terms of the Arab American community, and particularly Syrian Americans, and also being American Muslim, this time is an extremely difficult time. It seems that American Muslims are being used as a political football right now, and that in our political discourse, perhaps the most accepted form of bigotry can be labeled or can be pushed upon Muslims with very little political pushback. I mean, we have in our political discourse, unfortunately, a native Detroiter like myself, Dr. Ben Carson, has made completely outrageous comments that he doesn't believe that an American citizen, just because of their faith being Islam, is suitable to be president of these United States of America or to sit on the Supreme Court. We have these nonsensical comments from Donald Trump about not only monitoring mosques, but putting forth a Hitler-esque type of framework that maybe American Muslims should walk around with ID cards. If this was any other religious group, if this was for Jewish Americans, Mormon Americans, Seventh-day Adventists, it would be absolutely unacceptable in our political discourse. But when it comes to Muslims, it's actually used as a fundraising strategy where they go out and make anti-Muslim comments, and in the case of Ben Carson, they do record fundraising in the process.
Is there any parallel, though, to what happened during World War II, certainly after the events of December 7th, 1941, as Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and that resulted in the internment camps of those Japanese Americans here in the U.S.? Not that we're getting to that point, but just the attitude that Americans had back in 1941-42 and where we are today in 2015.
I don't believe we're at that point yet, but God forbid if there's another major attack on our soil. But, you know, what you're saying is not completely out of the realm. There are people who have said these things out loud. Roanoke, Virginia's mayor just recently backtracked a couple of days ago, but he said within the past week, he put forth the notion that that American Muslims could be placed into internment camps. So there are actually people in the political establishment in city-states, as well as in the broader society, who actually believe and actually think that American Muslims could be dealt with the same way that Japanese Americans were unjustly dealt with after the attack of Pearl Harbor, in which Japanese Americans had nothing to do with the attack of Pearl Harbor, just like American Muslims have absolutely zero to do with Daesh or what just took place recently in Paris.
Our guest is Dawud Walid. He is the executive director of the Michigan chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations.